It says it's live streaming, but it's not actually. I'm just doing it to a private one, just to have a backup recording.
Okay.
All right.
Wait, do you want me to record on my end?
Oh, if you're up for it, I was just going to record the Zoom, but if you're up for sending me an audio track, it always sounds better.
Yeah. Okay. I know these things because I do the athletic podcast, and they're the ones who sent me a mic, and they're the ones who tell me to record on my own screen. So,
Oh, sweet.
Okay, I will do that now. All right, I'm good to go.
Cool. All right, so I'll record an intro afterwards, so I'll just get right into the interview.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, everyone. Really excited for this week's show. It's a yearly tradition. We've got the great Dom Lucian from The Athletic, the creator of one of the most popular and best projection spreadsheets out there. Not even a spreadsheet, a whole tool. We're going to get into it all. Welcome back to the show, Dom.
Thank you for having me. It is always a pleasure. Still eating some hangover pizza pockets, but I'm always excited to be here.
Yeah, this will be a good test to see, like, Dom hungover, is he still able to bring the goods? So we'll find out at the end. I'll listen back to last year's episode, see if there's anything different. But yeah, so here's the agenda for today. We've got to talk about this spreadsheet, how it works, of course. Also, a lot of people are interested in like how you come up with your projections. So beyond just the tool itself, like how you come up with how many points and blocks and whatever each player is going to get. So I have some questions from the patrons of Keeping Karlsson that I will ask you about that. And then I've got some specific players that I wanted to run by you where your projections differ from what we were thinking maybe they should be. So we'll be able to get your sense of if you agree or disagree with your model. But like, yeah, I guess just to get started, why don't you just tell people about this spreadsheet in terms of like how can they use it to be successful in their fantasy drafts?
Yeah, so I think this is the 4th or 5th year that I've released it. And the basic idea is that if you just follow someone's rankings, it's not going to be the same as football where everyone has the same format, or maybe they do PPR, but like their rankings for those. For hockey, every league is different in some way. There's a weird quirk, and you might have a different category than the standard format because maybe you're a smart person and you don't want to use plus minus. That's how it should be.
Right.
And the idea I had was to create a spreadsheet that ranked players based on your own league settings. So if you're in a league that is just points, then you can sort by points or whatever. If you're in a league that heavily values shots, it'll put players with high shot volume up higher in the rankings. And it's all done through a way called VORP, value of replacement, which I stole from football. And the idea there is you're comparing a player based on the replacement level player. So in fantasy hockey, that might be a bench player. It might be a waivers player. The way I've normally done it is a player you can get outside the first, I think, 10 or so rounds. And that's worked well for me, although we've got some new ideas in that realm this year.
Yeah, definitely the VORP is critical, right? Because otherwise you'd be having, Cale Makar like way down the list because, he getting 70 points wouldn't rank him like the top 10, top 20 of league scoring. So obviously you need to like figure out, is a 70-point defenseman worth more than like a 90-point forward or whatever? And so you're comparing, when you're talking about VORP, you're talking about like for each position, you decide how they're better than the replacement level player at their position.
Exactly. It's all about position scarcity and how big your lineups are, because everyone knows there are a lot of centers out there, but not too many wingers, and definitely not a lot of defensemen, especially in recent years. We've seen a lot of teams start shifting to 4 forwards, 1 defenseman, top power plays, and using those power plays 60, 70% of the time rather than an even split. And that's really put a chasm between the top defensemen and some of the lesser ones that don't get that top power play time.
Yeah, for sure. And at the end of the day, like once you're playing in your league, if you want to pick up a replacement player from free agency, what matters is how much better your player is than the replacement level player. So yeah, like definitely that's what makes defensemen so valuable, maybe goalies depending on the format. I know like a big change you made this year to your VORP calculation is now you've given people the option to choose like between this like either VORP using draft, position, or a blend of the two. So we've had a bunch of questions people wanted to ask you, just if you could explain what's the difference, like what do you recommend, like how should people set up your sheet to maximize these rankings?
It really is in the eye of the beholder, but last year in the comments, because it was the first year on The Athletic, so I was able to see how people were using it and what they thought. And one of the things I remember is people saying, shouldn't replacement players be based on position? So shouldn't it be, if you have 4 defensemen you need for your starting lineup and there's 12 teams in your league, shouldn't replacement be the 48th defenseman? And it wasn't. It was the 18th, and that's just because defensemen never go very high. That's just how people draft, because defensemen obviously score less, and I guess it's not a high priority for them. But if you do it by position, the difference between the first defenseman and the 48th defenseman is much larger than the first center and the 24th center, for example. So some people want to draft that way, where they know the exact value between a defenseman and what they can get for a bench player. That is the new part, the position-based. What has always been there is the draft-based, which is I look at the top 100 for Yahoo's ADP and see how many players are drafted per position, and I compare that way. So it's still first center to 24th center, but now there's 19 wingers instead of 24 wingers. There's 18 defensemen instead of 48. And that sort of feeds off into the way people draft. Because the biggest thing about this tool is not going by my projections strictly. It is sort of using some game theory to target players where they should. So that's why ADP is always a part of the package and always part of the list, because if I have a player ranked 40th and he's available at 120, do not draft him at 40th. Maybe start targeting him around 90, 100, but those are players you can wait on and might provide excess value. And then you can get a 41st ranked player and your 40th ranked player later. So that's why I prefer using draft, but I know some people, they want to see what the actual value of a replacement is, and that's where position comes in. And I think when I drafted this year, I used blend to sort of get the best of both worlds. But yeah, it's really up to you and how you view value, because anyone using this has played fantasy hockey probably for a while and has their own fantasy hockey acumen that they can bring to the table. And I just wanted to give them some options.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, it really depends on the vibe of your draft. Like it would be such a shame, even if you know that this like next defenseman is the best defenseman available, but you know this person's not going to be taken for like 3 rounds. Why waste your pick now? You could take someone else and still get that defenseman in a round or two. To be honest, like sometimes I don't even really use VORP for a snake draft. What I like to do is just sort of split each position separately, which you also have in your spreadsheet, the ability to just look at the different positions. And then I kind of go by the vibe of like, if not a lot of D have been taken, maybe I don't need to rush to get a D. Or like I split people into tiers. And as long as I know I'm going to get one of my top D, why do I need to rush to get one? I could just get one later. So yeah, it definitely is. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just agreeing with you. I was getting some ad libs in there. Like I was a fantasy hockey Travis Scott. Like, yeah.
No, very appreciated to have a good. Yeah, Brian does that too on the show. It's very important to get that. A laugh is the best, right? If I say something funny and then I get your laugh there, I'll not mute that part out of the track for sure. But okay, so now that we've got the idea of how your spreadsheet works, let's talk about how you actually come up with the projections, because that's actually the most interesting thing to me. I've got your spreadsheet for years now. I just want to plug in and see, what does Dom think the players are actually going to do next year? And I'm always so fascinated by like, how do you come up with this? Like, what are the inputs? So maybe at a very high level to start, like you're coming up with a projection of, say, Zach Hyman for 66 points. We'll get into him more specifically, but in general, like, how do you come up? You've got data from previous years, obviously, and somehow you're converting that into projection. How does that work?
So Zach Hyman's actually a very good case, and I guess we'll get into it later, but I'll touch it now because he was a big target of mine, and I didn't have a lot of picks this year because I went all in last year to finish second, which still pains me to this day. And I thought Hyman would last because he's Zach Hyman, and he went like 10 picks before my second pick, and I was just fuming. Oh, sorry, my voice. There's the last night's effects taking over.
No problem.
So basically, I look at the last 3 years of a player's production, and I weight the most recent year twice as much as the year before. So essentially, it's like 4-2-1 weighting. That's the basic premise, although different stats will have different weights based on my own research on how much they should be weighted. So goals and assists would be different from how shots are weighted previously. I think shots are what they did last year is a lot more important. So I look at that, and then I regress based on sample size. So if it's a rookie, he's regressed heavily to the mean. And if it's an established player, he won't be as much. But that regression is different based on roles. So If it's a high-end player like McDavid who plays 20 minutes a night, he's going to be regressed to other players playing 20 minutes a night, because if you do it to the population mean, the top players will shrink a bit too much to the middle, and the bottom players will get way more credit than they deserve. So the bottom players get regressed to other fourth line talents. And the last thing I do, and this is the only thing I do that's sort of more subjective. I almost said subjective. Brain not working today. Okay. A little more subjective, but for time on ice, I start looking at every team's depth chart, and I talk to every beat writer at The Athletic and say, hey, what do you think is happening here? What's power play one going to look like? And I look at their time last year, and if they were the sixth most used forward at even strength, and this year they're maybe slated to play on the top line, I will give them a time on ice boost that it's equivalent of going from sixth to third, basically. And for power play, I'll look at their percentage of power play ice time. And if they had 45% last year and this year they're going to power play one, I might bump them up to 55 or 60. And that is what happened with Zach Hyman, because he did not play on the top power play in Toronto. I think he only got like 20% of the minutes there. And in Edmonton, he looks like he's gonna be on power play one, the best power play in the league, playing in the net front. So I think there's a good chance he sees a spike in production just based on going to the top power play and getting maybe 3 times as many minutes as usual.
Right, I see. So basically what you're saying is with Hyman, you figured out like your projection in terms of just per minute, taking into account his previous year's stats. But now, since this year you figured out that you think he's going to be playing more minutes, especially on the power play, that's why he ends up getting bumped to a projection that's higher than his career high. Last year he had 33 points in 43 games for a 63-point pace, and this year you have him projected for a 66-point pace. That's because you're expecting the extra power play time.
Yeah, and he's an established player, but even those get regressed a bit. So if not for the power play time, he might be around 55 to 60. But because of the power play time, he gets bumped to 65 range. And what my model doesn't account for is players changing environments. So it doesn't account for the fact he'll probably play with Connor McDavid. So it could be underrating him. But then again, he played with Matthews and Marner, so maybe not. We will see.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that 66, it already seems kind of high for Zach Hyman, so I don't think you need to go any higher there. I guess also you were saying a bit about how like for rookies, like you take their age as a factor. So like I'm looking at like a couple of Sens. You've got Tim Stützle and Josh Norris both projected for 63-point paces. Last year they only paced for like 45 and 51 points respectively. So you've given them both a huge bump. Like, so what leads your model to give these two guys who have never come close to a 63-point pace? What makes you project that?
There's definitely some age adjustment. So Stützle will have, I think he's 18, 19. So he'll have one of the biggest bumps just from being young and expecting a young player to have a higher scoring pace the following year. And I think with both, I expected a big minutes increase as well, figuring they'll be a more prominent part of the lineup and get more time to play at even strength, more power play time. And I think that enough, it was able to create that huge boost.
I see, right. So again, the time on ice, the one subjective part is what brings them up. Okay, so here's where it gets interesting. So obviously, I agree with a lot of your projections, and I've done some spreadsheets of my own, and it seems like the patrons of Keeping Karlsson agree with you also for the most part. Basically, what I did is we've been doing a bunch of mock drafts with our patrons, and so I took your spreadsheet and I put in the cupful, the Keeping Karlsson Ultimate Patron Fantasy League settings, which I think is pretty standard, like mostly weighted for offense, a decent amount for shots, and then like a little bit for your hits and blocks and some of the peripherals. No plus minus, don't worry, Dom. But so basically, I put in my league settings into your spreadsheet. I got for each player a rank for their position. Just to keep it simple, I just did like forwards, defenseman, and goalies. I didn't get into like center, left wing, right wing. Then I looked at the mock draft results, which Kevin A. Bear has been putting together this spreadsheet of like all the average ADPs of all of the players in the mock drafts we've been doing recently. So now I've got a ranking of each player in terms of their position rank from our mock drafts, and I've got the ranking from your spreadsheet, and I compared them to see which players you guys disagree with the most. So now we can get a sense of who maybe is someone that's like an outlier in your spreadsheet in terms of the projection not being what people will expect. And so let's go through some of these guys, and I'll be interested to get your take on, do you agree more with your model, or do you agree more with the patrons of Keeping Karlsson for where they took them?
Okay, sounds good. I should probably input the settings here, right?
Well, I've got all the information, so don't you even worry about it. I'll supply you everything you need.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, if you decide you need to, then we could take a break and we could put that
Okay.
in. All right, so let's start with some players that you're higher on than the patrons. And I want to start in net. That's actually one position we didn't talk about. So maybe you could
Mhm.
afterwards talk about how you came up with those projections as well. But the first guy that really jumps out is Jacob Markstrom, who you have ranked fourth as fourth best goalie in our settings, behind only Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, and Saros. The patrons were taking him as the 10th ranked
Mhm.
goalie overall. I think I know the answer here because our league setting is like there's a lot of volume. Like we
Yeah.
do have points for saves and wins, but then negative points for goals against, but the wins aren't worth like that much. So I see you've got Markstrom starting 60 games and only winning 31 of them and only putting up a
Mhm.
meager
Mhm.
910 save percentage. But in our format, that'll be enough to be still the fourth best goalie. So that's maybe more just a heads up for people to really make sure you use Dom's spreadsheet to put in your league settings so you rank these guys properly. But I guess is your take that just Markstrom's going to be one of the biggest volume guys in the league just because Calgary doesn't have anyone else?
It is, yeah, he seems like a pretty safe bet for that. I remember last year, one of the big guys, the model, like, there were two. One of them hit, one of them didn't. That's the thing with goalies. So the two guys last year were Cam Talbot and John Gibson. And Cam Talbot was a bit safer because Minnesota looked better, but John Gibson was supposed to be a big volume guy on a bad team. And he didn't pan out, but Cam Talbot ended up being one of the best fantasy goalies because Minnesota ended up being surprisingly good, and he played, I think, 60% of the games. And that's, I think, the biggest thing people sleep on with goalies is that an average goalie getting 60 starts is probably better than a good goalie getting 45. And there's a lot of those goalies now where there's a bigger timeshare. And I think Markstrom adds value just from being basically a bell cow in net. And I drafted him myself. Um, the goalies that were going before him, I couldn't believe they were so bad. And he was just sitting there in like one of the last rounds. He's one of the last goalies taken. And yeah, it's not that I think he's that great, but I think he's fine. And Calgary should be an average team. So I I do think he's a good target in the later rounds because, as you know from previous stints on this podcast, I don't like to reach for goalies because I think it is insane how much they change from year to year, and you don't really know. Markstrom a year ago was probably a top target because in Vancouver he looked unreal and Calgary looked like a better team, and then he ended up being a little dusty. This year, I think he's probably an underrated target because people only look at last year and forget that he's been a decent goalie before. And again, it's always about start volume for me as well.
Well, yeah, Calgary's backup right now, I think, is slated to be Dan Vladar, who's never
Mm-hmm.
even played a season in the league. So definitely there's all the reason to expect that Markstrom gets the large majority of starts. So one of these goalies, I'm going to guess one of the people that you were bringing up as someone who you were surprised they were getting taken ahead of Markstrom, at least according to your spreadsheet, has got to be Darcy Kemper, right? Because he's someone who, or you tell me, but like the patrons have him ranked as the sixth goalie according to our mock drafts, behind only
Mm-hmm.
Vasilevsky, Hellebuck, Leonard, Saros, and Shestyorkin. Your model clearly doesn't see it that way. It has Kemper all the way down at 19th. You only have him projected for 45 games and a 915 save percentage. So definitely nothing like what Grubauer did last year or a save percentage similar to what Kemper's done in the past. I know last year wasn't that amazing. So is this you thinking, like, how do you come up with that games played projection for goalies? Is that again just like you're talking to the beat writers and trying to figure it out? Because I would have
Yeah.
expected Kemper to get more, but obviously you're thinking Francouz is going to steal a bunch of starts.
It is tough. And luckily, you can edit the games played projections for goalies if you think Kemper will start more and just say, you know what, screw you, Dom. I think he's going to start 55 games. And then, boom, just like that, he moves from 19th to probably like third because he is a good goalie on the best team in the league. So I fully get that. With Kemper, the reason he's lower is he is an injury risk. And I think Francouz is, he was a very good goalie when he played. And I think he can push him for starts. And I don't think he will be the cut and dry, like big volume start guy. Although the next time I update, I'll probably move it up from 45. To be honest, I do think that's probably a little low. Maybe 50, maybe 55. We'll see.
Okay. Well, there you go. So the people listening either just make sure to download the updated Dom spreadsheet when it's out, or you could use this podcast as your guide to like where to go and maybe make edits if Dom is saying that he
Yeah.
agrees with the patrons more than his rankings.
Well, you can always edit. That's the beauty of it. And if you're good with Excel, you can update your own projections. You can do a blend. I know in the past Scott Cullen has done really good projections, and it's probably worthwhile to take the time and like blend mine and his together and get a super projection, because two heads are always better than one. But yeah, they're always editable, and if you don't agree with me, that is okay.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, what I was saying is that we're giving people tips on who they should go and
Yeah.
edit. So yeah, that's a good idea to just maybe blend you and Scott Cullen. One thing I like to do is make a spreadsheet where I have like a little drop down for each player where I can choose between you or Scott Cullen, and then I kind of go through and use my gut to decide who I like better. And then I also have like a 50. I don't know. I always go too ham with preparing for my drafts. Okay, let's do one more goalie before we get to skaters. In a similar vein to Jacob Markstrom, you've got Matt Murray starting 55 games, so only 5 less than Markstrom. That actually makes him tied for 4th in games played, according to your projections, behind only Hellebuck, Vasilevsky, and Markstrom. He's tied with a few people. So obviously our patrons in our mock drafts were not excited about Matt Murray. He was being taken as the 37th ranked goalie, not even drafted in some of the leagues. According to our league settings, though, with your projections, he's the 12th ranked goalie, even with a 903 projected save percentage. I guess it's just because of the volumes. Maybe that's actually making me think that our
What are your
league settings.
What are your
Well, I don't know. It's a lot of points for saves, and you got a little bit of a hit for a goal against, but I guess not as much as last year. But do you really think, though, that Matt Murray has it in him to be a volume guy at this stage in his career and play 55 games?
volume? Yes. Good. No. So I'm wondering if the save to goal against ratio is maybe what's how many points for a save?
We did negative one. Oh, sorry. We did 0.35 for a save and then negative 1.5 for a goal against.
Interesting. So
last year was -2 for a goal against, but then we found goalies weren't being drafted at all, and they weren't found to be that valuable. So we decided to make, and also people didn't like how they were getting negatives a lot of nights. Like for example, when Matt Murray was in net, so we decided to give a little bit of relief for these goalies that led in a lot of goals.
So what I have is 0.5 for a save and -3 for a goal against. So basically, yours would be 0.7 for a save in my league, and like I've also like looked at it because I remember it used to be 0.4 and -3, and goalies were just getting railed. They just could not get any points, and we moved up to 0.5. And I think that was decent. That might still be too low if scoring is up, but I think that might be the reason Murray is so high, because he's getting all these credits for saves because Ottawa is such a bad team, right? And they're going to allow a lot of shots against, and he's probably not going to get dinged for a goal against as much as perhaps he should.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're saying anyways that you give more points for a save than we do, since we're down at 0.35. But regardless, I guess the real question to me that I think is interesting is like Matt Murray hasn't played 55 games in his whole career. So that's why
that is true. Yeah.
I would have been nervous about the injuries and not draft him, because I think he'll probably, and even if he does, not get injured, I think there's a good chance that he's not as good as the backup, or at least they're like 50-50. So I thought that was the interesting thing I wanted to bring up. Is just like, do you believe in Matt Murray just in terms of getting all these games?
I mean, now that you mentioned his own injury history, no, I do not. Yeah, I just to like be clear, like I do like saves are more in my league, but goals against are also more.
Right. Yeah.
So that it's the ratio that I think throws it off.
Okay, gotcha. Anyway, okay, so everyone obviously could tinker with their league settings and try to come up with the perfect goalie list, but I think first go and change that Matt Murray games played projection, if you unless you really think this is the year that he stays healthy. All right, so let's get to some skaters now. Obviously, a lot easier to predict. Still not easy, but easier than goalies, as far as I'm concerned. So Nikolai Ehlers is the next one I want to talk about. These are, again, players that you're higher than the patrons, and we'll get to the players that the patrons are higher on than you. So Ehlers, your model projects him to match his 80-point pace from last season, putting him ahead of even like Kyle Connor, who the patrons were generally drafting ahead of Ehlers. In our format, Ehlers is your 17th ranked forward, and he was being taken as like the 37th forward in our drafts. You even have him increasing his shot on goal rate. Like he was a 3.1 shots per game last year. Now you have him up at 3.3. So I'm curious to know like why the increase for Ehlers' shots, to go along with that really high point pace again. Are you just expecting him to get more time on ice or maybe more power play time this year?
Yeah, that is the big thing, because if I did nothing, he would have been a good regression candidate. A lot of his 5-on-5 stats were a little juiced. His power play stats were pretty juiced as well. But he, for some reason, has always been on power play 2 in Winnipeg, and he was unreal in the power play last year. And I think this is the year they start figuring out that Nikolai Ehlers is their best player and use him as such. I think last year they had Paul Stastny on the top power play and Nikolai Ehlers sitting on that second unit. Honestly, given that they use Josh Morrissey a lot, they'd probably be better served just using 5 forwards because they can. But they didn't, and I get the feeling that this is the year that changes, and Ehlers will be power play one. I talked to Murat, who's the Winnipeg beat writer, and he wanted to believe, but he wasn't sure. So that is not set in stone, but I have a good feeling about Ehlers. That one's subjective, though. It is pretty subjective. We'll see if it pays off, but he's always around 16 minutes, and you can see on the spreadsheet he's at 18 minutes this year, and that's from a bit of a power play boost. And we'll see if he gets it.
Awesome. Sorry, there's like sirens and stuff going on behind me.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess he's always been great in terms of his per minute stats. It's just a matter of, yeah, if you're right that he's going to get that extra time. Like on one hand, you say, well, Paul Stastny was on top power play, so obviously that means Ehlers should have a good shot. On the other hand, Stastny's back; they re-signed him, so I guess we'll find out if this is the year, like Murat said as well, that like they finally decide to move Stastny down at 35 years of age and get Ehlers up on that top power play. And then yeah, the sky's the limit. Maybe even your 80-point projection is like potentially too low. Like I'd be really excited to see what Ehlers could do with top power play time.
Me too.
Okay, so next up, I've got Jared McCann here. So your model has him projected to lead Seattle in scoring with a 59-point pace, and that makes him the 68th ranked forward in our league settings. And the patrons were taking him at around 102. Seems like the opposite. Or sorry, yeah, the 102. Obviously, I guess you're really believing in what McCann did last year. He had a career year last year where he put up a 59, or he put up a. Sorry. I don't know how this is organized. He put up a 61-point pace with Pittsburgh. It was like, especially at the end of the season, things really took off once he got into the top six. I believe it was because Crosby was injured at one point, or Malkin was injured. So now he goes to Seattle. Your model sees him pretty much staying just as great, being the highest scoring player on the Kraken. So yeah, can you explain why you have that? Is that just like you're projecting him to get the most ice time?
It's a little bit of that. I do project him to get an ice time boost, especially power play one, and he was amazing on the power play for Pittsburgh last year. He is what helped them get out of a funk, because I remember early on they were struggling, and McCann steps in and suddenly it's working. And I think a lot of people I guess they take credit away from him because they think that his point pace was because of Malkin or Crosby last year, and that's just not the case. He was leading his own line for a bit of time when Malkin was injured. He was on the second line, and he was putting up these amazing results. So I think we see I'm so sorry. I think with McCann, we see him potentially taking over the top line center job early on, especially with Yanni Gourde out, and being one of Seattle's most trusted scorers. I personally see him as potentially Seattle's Jonathan Marchessault, where a lot of people weren't believing that Marchessault's production was the real deal back in Florida. And then he gets to Vegas and he continues doing his thing. And I think McCann can perform in a similar vein. And I drafted him in my league because I had to, because I didn't have many picks and I need to take those high risk shots. I think McCann is worthy of a deep sleeper selection.
Yeah, so maybe if people are using your sheet and they have McCann up, ready to go, like you were saying at the start, they can use their ADP and be smart. Like even if they believe in you, they can still wait a couple of rounds, maybe still get McCann, and then hope to get that really good late round value. Because like I was saying, the patrons were taking him a lot further down than you have him, but I don't see a big reason to disagree with you. Like 60-point projection isn't too crazy if he's going to be a top line, top power play guy on the team. It's just so hard to predict what Seattle's going to do since we've never seen him before.
Yeah, and the big thing with a lot of Seattle player projections is that when I was doing the power play ice time, the only one who played power play one regularly was Jordan Eberle. So a lot of Seattle players just got a boost based on someone has to fill that power play now. And McCann was one of those guys where I think the power play will probably be structured around him and Eberle. In Vegas's first year, the two power plays were split a bit, so I didn't go crazy and say they're going to get like 65% of the ice time, but even 55% is a big step up from where McCann was before.
Do you recall who you had as the defenseman quarterbacking the top power play in Seattle?
I had a 52-48 split between Giordano and Vince Dunn because I truly don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Okay, so let's go now to a player that your model loves, and I'm really curious to see why. And that's Jacob Verana. So this is a guy whose career high is a 62-point pace with Washington 2019-20. Last year, 59-point pace with the Caps and the Wings. I know he had that like 4-goal game at the end of the year, but you've got him bursting past all of that with a
Mhm.
67-point pace projection in his first full season with Detroit. That makes him the 50th ranked forward for us. The patrons were taking him as the 88th ranked forward in the mock draft drafts. Do you have any idea why you projected him to break out like that at the age of 25?
Vrana has already broken out. He's a per minute god. He is unreal per minute. I have no idea why Washington did not play him. I know why they didn't play him on top power play. That makes sense. It's loaded already. In Detroit, he won't have that problem. He's going to be power play one. He's going to be on the top line. He's going to get more minutes than he ever has before. And I think we saw what he can do when he was in Detroit already. He scored, I think, almost point per game, or maybe he was point per game, and he was getting 18 minutes a night. I think he can beat his career high based on what he's shown on a per minute basis for Washington over the past 3 years.
So your idea is just he's going to be getting a lot more minutes on Detroit than he was getting in Washington, and then like accordingly he'll just like do a lot better. My I guess counterpoint would be like it's Detroit. Like how good can someone be there?
That is absolutely fair. The issue again with my projections is I don't account for context in terms of moving players, moving teams. We saw that with Hyman, but Vrana already played some games with Detroit. He had an audition with them and he knocked it out of the park. So I'm not as worried, and he's going to play with Larkin, so he's not playing with a bad player. It's probably one of the best players he has played with, because I don't know if I think he got time with Backstrom, but maybe not as much. With Larkin, I think he'll be a bit more consistent.
Okay, yeah, I guess that's reasonable. Yeah, we have seen like Mantha have good seasons in Detroit in the past, and then also some bad seasons. So hopefully this is the year. Bertuzzi's back, so maybe if the top line is Larkin, Bertuzzi, and Verana, that could work out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be interesting. And yeah, so you're sticking with this big projection for Verana. I'm curious to see if it'll work out.
We
Uh,
will see.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's a lot of other guys in exciting new situations this coming season that your model is like less excited about than maybe the patrons are expecting, that a lot of people are expecting. Like one example, like I've got a couple Panthers in here. Sam Reinhart paced for 61 points last year. Your model is projecting like a 63-point pace in Florida. I know a lot of people have like a lot of hype for this guy, thinking now he's going to be playing, potentially with Barkov. But I guess your model doesn't take that into account. The patrons were taking him as the 45th forward on average versus your 75th forward ranking with the projection you have. So do you agree with your model that Reinhardt's going to kind of stay the same as he was in Buffalo?
I agree with my model because I hate Sam Reinhart, and I'm going to tell you a story about Sam Reinhart.
Nice.
This man has ruined my life twice. I don't know what it is about Sam Reinhart during the fantasy playoffs, but 3 or 4 years ago, I had the best team, was in the final, dusty ass team, finished I think fourth or fifth in the league and ended up in the final. We have a 4 team final, and it goes on for 3 weeks, and it's the most points between those 4 teams. And last game of the season for the fantasy purposes, Sam Reinhart gets a power play hat trick. And this guy shoots from third to first in a heartbeat. And I lost. And I shouldn't have lost, but I did. Flash forward to this past year, fantasy playoffs, the same guy has Sam Reinhart. And again, Buffalo is terrible. Sam Reinhart has done nothing all year. And there he is in the fantasy playoffs, being one of the most productive players in the entire league. And I hate him. I don't hate any player, but I hate Sam Reinhart.
It's
That did not affect the projections at all. I didn't personally subtract any points from Sam Reinhart. That's just, I need people to know how much I hate this player.
I mean, I was thinking when you were going to say how much you hate him, you were going to talk about how you've had him on your team and he like
No.
let you down. It's like you hate him because of how good he's been for your opponents.
Like in very specific situations, because he has no business doing that based on everything else he's shown for the previous amount of time before he got to the fantasy playoffs. So I don't know what it is. But yeah, Florida has magic. We saw Sam Bennett just roll in and be unreal. Carter Verhaeghe went from fourth liner to first liner. Anthony Duclair was a top line talent next to Barkov. So if Sam Reinhart is next to Barkov, I would definitely buy into that hype. I'm just a little concerned because he's played with Eichel and nothing has really happened from that. So I don't know. We'll see. I like the talent he has. I'll respect the talent he has. I think a breakout should be coming, and I think he's going to a team that can facilitate that. I would just be worried about overdrafting him.
I think I see. So you're kind of thinking that people should still stick with your model and maybe that 63 point projection, maybe bump them up to like 65, 66, but not crazy like point per
Hmm.
game like some people are thinking.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where everyone's like, "Oh, this guy's gonna break out," and then they don't do anything. I think last year, it was Svechnikov mania, where everyone thought he was poised for like an 80, 85 point season, like big breakout, and I think he just did the exact same thing he always did.
Right.
So I I'm worried about my model does not forecast breakouts unless it's a time when ice bump, like we see with Frana, because I think those are a bit random and hard to come by. And I think if a lot of people are saying it, I sometimes get weary. But at the same time, Reinhardt is in a perfect situation in Florida. Elite center. Everyone that goes there seems to do so much better than they were before, and he gets the Buffalo stink off of him. So if ever there was an overhyped player to target, he was the one. But it's just not my MO usually.
Yeah, and of course people are only thinking of the glass half full. Like you could say also in Buffalo he was getting like all these big minutes because he was
Mm-hmm.
like the main guy. Now he's in Florida where there's so many good players on the team. He's not as guaranteed the top power play. I'm sure he starts there on the top power play, but maybe he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't hold it the whole year. So yeah, there is some reason to be a little bit
Mm-hmm.
wary. So I like where your model has him.
The other issue with Reinhardt is a lot of people will point to his big breakout last year that ruined my life, and that was when he played center. And I don't think he's gonna play center in Florida if he's starting with Barkov. If he does, he'll probably play with Huberdeau, which is nice, and it'll give him like secondary minutes to feast on. So we'll see. But on the wing, he might not be as good as he is as a center. And if he is a center, and I guess he has both eligibility, so it may not matter. But yeah, we will see.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, and there's another Florida player which you brought up that I definitely want to ask you about. So we'll get to that in just a sec. You're listening to Keeping Karlsson. Okay, sorry, just plug that in. Okay. All right, we are back. And yes, we were talking about Sam Reinhart on Florida. So I might as well ask you about this other player, Sam Bennett, who obviously your model doesn't respect too much because he had this amazing run, but it was over only 10 games after he got traded to Florida. He popped off for 15 points in 10 games after moving from Calgary to Florida. Then in the playoffs, he had 5 points in 5 playoff games. So, definitely looking like he's for real over there. He was on the second line centering Huberdeau, playing on the top power play. Obviously, Reinhart's in the picture now, so it's hard to say what's going to happen with the power play. I guess you could tell me what your projections have in terms of how that power play is working out. But I'll just say first that, yeah, so you have him projected for only a 39 point pace, basically just like as bad as he was in Calgary, pretty much. The patrons were like psyched about him. He's getting drafted as like the 70th forward overall on average. You have him ranked like way down, like 145th forward. So what do you think? Do you agree with your model that Bennett is just a lowly 39 point guy, or is this a case where people need to be changing your projection?
Well, the thing with Bennett is he was not a 39 point guy with Calgary. He was like 30 point.
Right.
Like he was even lower because he was so bad in Calgary. Um, I think it's a matter of waiting 180 other games versus 10. And that
Exactly. Yeah.
is, it's very difficult to be sure after 10 games. Players go on hot streaks all the time. Um, Remember Jack Roslovic, his first 10 games in Columbus, and he had like, I think 12 points. And then the next like 40, he was just an average regular dude. So if we just go based on how he started his time in Florida, then Bennett is obviously looking unreal. But I'm a bit skeptical he can keep on that pace. I think I do probably have him a bit too low. There was some magic in Florida, but I don't think with Reinhardt there he'll be on that top power play. And yeah, I think he'll be higher than 39 point pace. I just wouldn't get ahead of myself and go, oh, this is a 60, 70 point player now.
I see. Okay, so if, let's say people want to be conservative, they don't want to like get overly hyped, but at the same time they do want to like not let this guy go undrafted. Because if you leave it how it is now, it's basically like, don't even draft. Like, what would you project him at if you were going to modify your sheet for your draft?
I think 50 might feel safe. I would hesitate to go any higher than that. 50 feels like okay, especially for a second line center. The one thing I do want to do in future years, I just never have time, is like have like my own opinion on these sheets and say this player should be higher,
Oh yeah.
this player should be lower. But yeah, never enough time. And I think it is helpful to have just like a baseline. and then people can fill it with their own opinions. But I do think there's value in having someone say, I think this player is a little better, especially the person who actually, created this. So next year, I think I'll have something that's a little more subjective to add, or even a way to just quickly adjust projections. So like maybe a little button that says, I think this guy will break out, and then boom, his stats inflate by like 10%, something like
Oh,
that.
just
Wouldn't
like a
that be
boost.
fun?
That'd be
Little
cool. That
little boost button.
like in Fast and the Furious when you're like
Yeah,
losing the race and at the last minute you press the button in your car and then you win the race.
yeah. Just a little boost, a little nos.
Yeah, well, at least for this year, we could just tell people this podcast episode is the addendum to your
Hmm.
spreadsheet to go and let you know who you might want to consider increasing. So then Bennett obviously came from Calgary. I want to point out another Calgary guy that jumped out to me. So again, I'm actually back on your list now of players that you're higher on than our patrons before I'll switch to the other list. But Noah Hannafin, you've got him at a 41 point projection. Like he was basically not being drafted in most of our mock drafts. You have him as like the defenseman on Calgary who's going to get the most points. Like 41 points obviously isn't crazy, but I'd imagine you've got him there because you're expecting him to take the top power play in Calgary over, I guess, like Rasmus Anderson or Juuso Välimäki, whoever the other contenders are.
I do think it'll be Hannafin. I think the organization likes him a lot. I think he's a left shot, so I think he'll get a good crack because he can fill Giordano's role probably the best of anyone. Obviously, he's been a bit disappointing to start his career, but he was a 5th overall pick at one point. He's got a lot of talent, and the coaches love him. I asked Haley Salvian who she thinks, and she is leaning Hannafin, which is why I have him so high. And I think the big boost of 41 points was almost entirely this guy's gonna get more power play time now. But yeah, I drafted him. Someone drafted Rasmus Anderson so early. I'm like, you sucker.
I
Because
mean,
Anderson
yeah.
sucks. He sucks.
I mean, that was a good pick last year, right? Because last year, if you wanted to use your last pick to take Rasmus Anderson, he was the one playing on the top power play in like training camp. I took him in one of my leagues, and he was actually good to start the year. But then eventually, he lost favor. He got bumped from the top power play. Now with new coach Sutter, when he came in, he didn't put Anderson on the top power play. So I definitely agree with you at this point. Don't draft that guy if you're going to take a swing on someone. Either take the upside in Välimäki, who I know some prospect people think he has, the chance to one day be this great player. But in the meantime, it seems like Hannafin's a safe pick.
Yeah, I drafted Anderson for the same reason as well last year. I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. I'm gonna reap the rewards, and I did for a bit. And then I watched like some Calgary games, and he looked lost on that top unit. And I think they do need that left shot to facilitate things. I believe in Hannafin. I drafted him this year very late. My last pick, I'm like, I know he's gonna be there, so I'll just take him there. And I think he's a guy you can definitely target where there's a bit of upside based on how much his role should change.
Yeah, I think like you could really do well in fantasy if you have smart like late picks in your draft, like maybe the earlier picks. It's almost like maybe you don't want to take the swing. Like why swing on like a Sam Reinhart when you can probably get another like more safe 70-ish point player at the place where he's getting taken, and then later on in your draft, that's where you could really get a defenseman who no one's thinking about that potentially is going to be on the top power play. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. Like last year, I actually took a swing on Rasmus Anderson at the end of one of my drafts, and also Jacob Chikrin. And obviously, Chikrin was the one who worked out a lot better. And now I don't have him queued up to talk about today, but I know your model's very high on him, and I guess for good reason. I know a lot of people are a little bit concerned because Arizona doesn't have like anyone for him to play with, but obviously your model doesn't take that into account.
He could take 400 shots next year just because he'll be the only one taking shots. I remember last year, my friend in my league, he had like no picks. And I'm like, oh, just do what I did. Just start targeting players who are like 22 to 24 who look ready to break out, who haven't yet. And I'm like, I really like Chikrin for Arizona. I think he'll be on the top power play. He's like, yeah, it's good. It's a good choice. And I'm mad about it because I should just drafted myself.
Well,
I'm too nice.
I guess so. Yeah, you released projections to the world. People are probably using your projections against you.
Well, here's the thing. There's a reason my projections always come out the day after Labor Day. My draft is Labor Day every year.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like it was like Chikrin and Nick Leddy were two, or not Nick Leddy. Sorry, let me say it again. Chikrin and Ryan Pulak last year, who I feel like I was thinking are the two sort of defensemen that you might be able to get kind of late that have like nice peripherals and potentially, what if they get on the top power play? We'll see what happens. And obviously Pulak's gone in the other direction. So maybe this year, I've been thinking maybe this year Pulak can be the Chikrin where you can get him super late. And who knows, maybe, I don't think he's going to be as good as Chikrin was. That was insane. But I don't know. He's a guy that jumps out at me as maybe a decent sleeper.
I have no idea what that power play is not very good. I don't know if it'll be Pulak because he doesn't seem to be playing well on it. Could be Noah Dobson. Could be Eric Gustafson, who signed a PTO, and he could just be like their power play specialist. I'm not sure, but we'll see.
Yeah, with Islanders also, it's like they've had a lot of turnover. So we'll see now how the power. I don't know. That team is really hard to project.
Yeah.
But anyway, generally you don't want to be putting your hopes on a power play defenseman on Islanders, even if it is the person getting the most time, because it doesn't usually work out too well. All right, so I still have a few more players here that you're higher on than the patrons, but I want to maybe I'll save them for the end if we have time. I want to switch to some players now that the patrons are higher on than you, so that you can like put the smackdown on them and tell them why they're dumb for reaching for these players. So let's start with Patrick Laine. So clearly, some people still believe in this guy. He was the 55th ranked forward on average in our drafts. Perhaps they're excited that he'll have Voracek now on his wing to like dish him the puck. You do not have, your spreadsheet does not expect him to bounce back to the glory days. You have him at a 53-point pace, only 2.3 shots per game. So do you concur with your model that Laine is not likely to be an impact guy again this season?
I traded for Patrick Laine a week before he was traded from Winnipeg,
Ah, brutal.
and I paid a lot to do it. And I'm still mad about it. I almost paid Alex DeBrincat, and luckily the guy trading for him didn't want him. So that worked out for me. And DeBrincat is a keeper for me now. But Laine was supposed to be like that guy for me. I had high hopes for him last year. I thought he's finally figuring things out in Winnipeg, and then he got traded to an absolutely dumpster fire of a team with no offensive creativity almost anywhere in the lineup. I like that they got Voracek. That could help Laine with a passer on his line. He's so difficult because of what he is, which is an incredibly one-dimensional shooter who does not do anything else. And he'll basically need that power play to click to get to 60, 70 points. And I just don't see Columbus's power play doing that. He doesn't create enough on his own. I do recall the one highlight reel goal last year where he went end to end, and that is few and far between because he doesn't do the little things that I think create production enough to be a reliable player to play 18, 19 minutes a night. I like the talent. I think he could be a 60-point player, but based on what we saw in Columbus last year, I would not take a risk on him at all.
Yeah, you still have him higher than what he did last year. Last year, you only had like a 43-point pace. You have him bumped up to 53 at least. So yeah, people are expecting even higher than that. Yeah, if you're saying that he needs to be playing with good players who could help create the opportunities for him, I don't think Columbus is the place because this is a team that's in tank mode right now.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, so I guess a lower caliber guy in terms of hype, but still someone that I'm interested to get your take on is Christian Dvorak, who just got traded to the Habs. He paced for 45 points last year. You have him projection for even less, like a 43-point pace, basically the 175th forward, not worth drafting in most formats. Some of our patrons could like him a lot better. Maybe it's just we have a lot of Habs fans. I don't know, but he was taken in our drafts around the 210 overall, like 133rd forward. I'm just curious to get your thoughts. Like he goes to now Montreal, where I'd imagine he's slotting in as the second line center. Playing with, say, like Hoffman and Gallagher, which wouldn't be too bad of a line. So do you concur with your model that Dvorak's just going to stay like this meager, like not worth rostering in most fantasy leagues kind of guy? Or do you think there's upside there as the 2C on Montreal?
I wouldn't roster him, I don't think, but it's complicated with him. 2 years ago, he played with Connor Garland and was very effective at 5-on-5. And if you think he can be that again with Gallagher, then he'll probably be a little higher than my model has him. The issue was last year he didn't have Garland and he was put in a shutdown role, didn't have much help. And at 5-on-5, he scored, I think, at like a fourth or third line rate and was terrible. All of his points were on the power play. And I don't really expect him to be on the top power play in Montreal. So that was one of the reasons that he was bumped down. But I think his 5-on-5 production might come back up with more talented line mates this year. Again, he will probably get the Deneau treatment and be the shutdown guy. And maybe that's the thing that held him back last year and why he might not be as productive at 5-on-5. But yeah, I'm not super high on him. If you look at his micro stats, this man does nothing out there. He doesn't move the puck into the zone. He doesn't really pass. He doesn't really shoot. He is extreme Tyler Bozak energy. And you're basically paying for his line mates. So if you think that Gallagher and Hoffman are good and he can leech off that, then I guess he's worth a flyer. I don't see it. I wouldn't take the risk on him that late. I'd go with someone who has a lot more upside in those rounds. I think he's a very safe 40 to 50 point player, and there's probably a guy who's in that range who might break out for 60 or 70, and I don't think that's him.
Right, I see. So you're thinking in a lot of leagues, maybe he'll be the kind of player that gets added and dropped all throughout the season, but
Yeah.
not sticking on people's lineups. All right, fair enough. There's another Canadian, though, that I want to bring up that definitely should be drafted, though I don't know, maybe not according to your spreadsheet. This is a guy who had 69 point pace breakout last year. I'm talking about Tyler Toffoli, but you've got him
Mm.
bumped back down to only a 52 point pace projection. I'm curious to know, is that because you don't necessarily think he's going to be on the top line, or is it just those weak LA years like holding him back too much? Like, I'm very curious to know why you have Toffoli just like regressing so bad to only that 52 point projection after being almost a 70 point guy last year.
I think it's the LA years probably bring him down. If he was 70 last year and was 50 in LA, you can probably split the difference and bring him around 60. But he's also 29, not exactly an age where players just suddenly start breaking out. So I think it's a possibility that last year was a bit of a flash in the pan. The fact he doesn't play that much hurts because, as I said before, like players are regressed to their role. So if he's playing a second line rate, he'll be regressed to other second line players instead of the scoring rate he was at. So I think 52 pace is probably a bit low, but I'd be a little concerned that last year was a one-hit wonder year for him.
I see. So maybe like bump him up a little bit, maybe to around 60 tops, but don't go too crazy. I guess like I'm excited about this like Caulfield, Suzuki to Foley line. But obviously, if everything breaks perfectly, then maybe he could repeat what he did last year. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons to think that things won't go as well. I know he had a high shooting percentage.
I mean, he might not even be on that line. I talked to Arpin Basu, and he said, "I have no idea what the lines are going to look
Okay.
like." Um, if he's left wing on that top line, then yeah, that's a good place to be. But he might be right wing on the third line. So if he's playing with Jake Evans and Jonathan Drouin or Mike Hoffman, then it's not
Well, yeah.
very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. He was on the third line for a bit last year, I
Mm-hmm.
recall, but he was getting top power play and doing well there. So yeah, the
Yeah,
Habs, I guess, are really tricky to project right now.
but top power play on the Habs is like 54% of the power play time. So like, what does it matter, right?
Right, true. Yeah. So I guess Toffoli's kind of getting the Sam Bennett treatment a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. Like,
A
yeah,
little bit, yeah.
little recency is making people more excited about him than maybe they should be, and maybe your spreadsheet is bringing him to a little bit lower than they should be. So yeah, split the
Mm-hmm.
difference, maybe bump him up just a little bit. Another guy who just recently broke out, and your spreadsheet has decided not to. Expect him to be able to keep doing it is Andre Palat over on Tampa. So last year he
Mm-hmm.
had that breakout season. He was the top line, top power play for a lot of the year, ended up with a 69 point pace as a 30-year-old. I guess some patrons still think he has upside to be somewhat similar. I guess at even strength, his situation might be better. He'll be playing with Kucherov and Point most likely if like what happened in the playoffs continues. Even though he'll likely lose that top power play spot to Kucherov unless he bumps Killorn. You've got him back down as his boring old 53 point self, like he's basically been his whole career. You don't see that 70 point pace continuing, or at least your model does it. What do you think?
Yeah, I was on the NHL's Fantasy podcast with Pete Jensen, and someone asked the same question about Palat because he was a fair bit lower than his point pace last season. And I really just think it boils down to that power play one spot is taken now. Kucherov's back. They like Kalor in the net front. Palat is getting the short end of the stick. Palat's, I just pulled this up right now. Palat's points per 60 at 5-on-5, 1.82 in 2018-19, 1.84 2019-20, 1.88 last year. Nothing meaningful changed about his even strength scoring. It's just that he got power play time and now he probably won't. And that's the gist of it. Yeah.
That makes sense. I guess like people are really if you were talking about Dvorak leeching off of Hoffman and Gallagher, I think people are really assuming that Palat's going to be leeching off of potentially if he's playing with Kucherov and Braden Point, then how I'm sure people are thinking like how could he not just like get so many points just from being there?
He was there in 2019-20 and he didn't have this amazing season either. So that's, I guess, the thinking for me.
Yeah, that's reasonable. All right, let's go to some defensemen now. So another player that the patrons are higher on than you. By the way, I want to again say like most of the players you guys agree on. So
Yeah.
it's making it sound like this podcast. I'm like, whoa, you got this wrong, you got this wrong. But it's more like it would be boring to just talk about how we all
Yeah.
agree on Connor McDavid and whatever.
How boring would that podcast be? I see like these 12 players really great work on these projections. Oh my God, thank you so much. Like you gotta nitpick because these are the decisions that keep fantasy players up at night and will affect their season, because I think it's like the 80-20 rule where 80% of the time you should agree and 20% of the time you should question things. And that is where you learn, and that's where you make debates, and that's where things get interesting. And that's what I guess this podcast should be in terms of projections. You don't want to talk about the 80% where you agree. You want to talk about the 20% where you want to know more about why the players are rated the way they are, and you want to discuss and debate whether they should be.
Yeah, my initial plan actually for this episode was going to be that I was going to take the Scott Cullen projections, compare them to your projections, and then point out the players where you guys differ so you could help me decide which one I should use. But his hasn't come out yet, so that's why I came up with this ADP idea instead. But yeah, that's basically, I agree. Like, it'll be an interesting thing when those Scott Cullen projections do come out. I'm definitely going to be making that spreadsheet, and I'll be very fascinated to see where you guys differ. And I have a feeling it'll be a lot of these similar players. So anyways, yeah, I'm going to D. The players that the Patriots are higher on than you. Shea Theodore. Huge breakout last season, 65-point pace, only 53 the year before, though at that point the 53-point pace was his career high. He's averaged over 3 shots per game over his last couple seasons, so he's been a super high-end guy in fantasy. You have him falling back down to a 54-point pace. Like, still all the shots on goal, but you're basically saying to forget last year and go back to what he was the year before. Your fall brings him down to like the 16th ranked defenseman in our format. The patrons were drafting him as the 9th defenseman. So yeah, why does your model not think he can repeat last season?
I think it's just always skeptical of a defenseman putting up over 60 points unless they do it 2 or 3 times in a row. And it'll always just push them down, because defensemen, I regress a lot heavier than forwards. So Theodore doing it once, I need to see him do it again. I think there's probably an issue with power play time because he is competing with Pietrangelo, and it's not a guarantee that he gets a huge amount of minutes there.
I see. So, right, your model probably just, you put in that subjective thing of how much power play time, and that's probably what did it. I'm sure if you were to bump up the power play time, that would get him a lot closer to what he did last year.
Yeah, possibly. But like, again, it's the regression for defensemen. If he is 50, 50, 60, then it'll probably believe it's closer to 50 until he does the 60 a second time in a row.
Interesting.
They just got to establish themselves and like be consistent, because their forwards are easier, where if they put up 70 points, you're like, this is probably a 70-point guy now. With defensemen, it's just less certainty because they do tend to yo-yo a bit.
I guess that's fair. Yeah, I see you have like Jacob Chikrin down at like around 50 points. So you're also not like believing in him so much for the points, like compared to what he did last year. But of course, like you said, the shots on goal could be high and make him still super valuable in a lot of formats. Okay, another defenseman I want to ask you about. So he's obviously a very different level than the Chikrins and the Shea Theodore, but Rasmus Ristolainen, another guy going into a new situation. The patrons, I guess, are excited to see what he could do in Philly. He was the 37th D-man taken on average. You have him as the 74th D-man, only a 24-point pace, only 3 power play points, only 1.4 shots per game. Decent hits and blocks, but basically like no offense. You've got him completely written off in Philly. And hey, he only had a 30-point pace last year. You have him going even lower to 24. He was once a guy that was like valuable in fantasy. He was getting like 40-plus points over in Buffalo. I take it your model is not expecting Ristolainen to get a big offensive role in his new situation in Philly?
Is Oliver Ekman-Larsson also on your list?
No one's taking him.
Okay.
Well, because I guess with Vancouver, like it's so obvious that Quinn Hughes is going to get the most offensive time. But with Philly, I guess there's like Ristolainen, there's Yandel, there's Ellis, there's Provorov. Like you would think
he's 4th on that list. He's not getting power play time anymore. He's not top pair anymore. His usage is going to go way down unless he has this miracle season where he's actually good. His role will be a 4th defenseman, and his entire thing in Buffalo was leeching power play points. And I just don't think he'll be able to do that in Philly as easily.
Yeah, okay, no, that makes sense. I just wanted to be sure, because obviously some people are still into him, and he did have those couple good seasons in Buffalo, and then it's easy to sort of want to just write off bad seasons in Buffalo recently, because everyone's been bad, and Buffalo's been such a weird team. So I'm definitely curious. I'll have him on my watch list if he doesn't get drafted in leagues. I think he will get drafted though, because he's like has such a good floor with his peripherals, and then I guess some people believe there's some offense, but obviously you do not.
No, he's so bad. The thing about like, it's always like an analytics versus eye test debate, and it's like, have you watched Rasmus Ristolainen play? Like, he has no idea what he's doing out there. Like, he might be one of the lowest hockey sense players I've seen in this league, and for some reason he just trotted out on the top pair. We'll see what he does in Philadelphia in a lower role with a better partner, but I don't have much faith in him.
So why do you think he got this contract with Philly? Like, do you think they see something in him that you don't, or they just like kind of don't know what they're doing?
Um, they saw that he was tall and big and mean all the time, and he had a lot of minutes. And hockey people love to trust ice time for defensemen because they trust the coaches in charge to play the best defenseman. But sometimes when you're that close to it and you have no other options, you just choose a guy who fits the mold. And I wonder if it was just a long con in Buffalo to get multiple picks for a terrible player by just leaving him on the top pair. I don't know. Teams aren't stupid; they have other information, but even the other teams I've talked to, like analytics staff, they're like, yeah, there's nothing here that we see either.
Right, yeah. I guess before Rasmus Dahlin came into the picture, there really weren't many other defensemen for Buffalo to go to. So I guess that explains the high minutes, even if he wasn't that great.
Mm-hmm.
Let's do one more goalie. Actually, this is another one where it just comes down to the games played projection, I guess. A lot of the patrons are expecting big things from our young new goalie in the league, Spencer Knight, who is going to Florida. And now he instead of like last year just coming in at the end of the year, he's expected to be in a tandem with Bobrovsky. I guess that you have him basically as a backup. Like you have him only
Mm-hmm.
projected for 37 games and also like kind of a low save percentage, only a 908 save percentage. Doesn't seem your model doesn't seem too excited about Spencer Knight, unlike some people who think he actually is the front runner to get more starts over Bobrovsky, who's been mediocre at best over these past couple of years in Florida.
Possibly. I have no idea to do with that tandem. I think it'll be mostly Bobrovsky because they invested so much in him, but it very well could be the moment where Spencer Knight takes over. He didn't play that much in the NHL, so I just used whatever stats he had. He was regressed very heavily, which gets him to that low save percentage. But if you believe in him, you can bump him up. I don't know what to do with him, to be
Yeah.
honest.
I think like I kind of agree in terms of like not worth reaching for a goalie like
Mm-hmm.
that. Obviously, if you're in a keeper league, it's a different story. But
Yes.
yeah, goalies again, it's so hard to project. But I just wanted to throw a few in there. Okay, so I see we have like a little bit of time left. Let me get lightning round, I guess, of a
Okay.
couple more players. So Jesper Bratt actually really jumps out as the guy with the biggest difference that I wanted to bring up. The patrons basically were like not even drafting him for the most part. When he was getting drafted, it was as the 183rd forward. You've got him ranked in our format as the 102nd forward with a 58 point pace projection in New Jersey. So yeah, I guess he has been good in spurts. I guess he's just never been like consistently valuable all season. Like I've never seen him actually be on someone's fantasy roster for a whole season. But last year he had a 53 point pace, which was solid. But yeah, your model has him even getting better than that. So do you have any reason why your model's so high on Jesper Bratt?
Uh, More usage, more power play time, and I think the big issue with him has always been health. He has never played a full season, but last year he only played 16 minutes. I think he'll maybe see a bump in that and be one of their more used forwards because he's one of their best forwards, I think. And he actually hasn't been on the top power play unit yet in his career and still put up a 53 point pace last season. So if he gets that role this year, I think he can break out maybe.
Yeah, I guess the interesting thing with New Jersey is that Hughes, Sharon Govich, and Kuokkanen line seemed kind of good. And
Yeah,
then I would assume then you've got Hischier, Zaka, and like
and Brat.
and Jesper Brad, I guess would be the second line. But then they also just brought in Thomas Tatar. So does he bump someone from that picture? So
I
how do you think that works out?
I would expect Tatar to bump Kokkonen and be on that top line, but they might just shelter him and put him on the third line. I'm not sure. If I signed Tatar, I'd probably put him with one of those top two centers and see if they can get like a Palmieri effect going.
Okay, so yeah, so anyways, obviously Brad is someone who you don't need to reach for according to our mock draft ADPs, but maybe someone we're taking at the end if you think he's gonna have this good role on this team. And this is an up and coming team. They also have Dougie Hamilton now to help that
Yeah.
power play hopefully, and maybe that helps everyone get more power play points if they're there.
Yeah. Honestly, he's probably a guy you like watch on the waivers to see how the team starts. I don't think I would draft him, but if that top power play is Hughes, Hischer, Bratt, and Tatar, Hamilton, for example, like that's a pretty decent power play if Hamilton can do what he's done before and Hughes and Hischer take a good step. So we can see there. Bratt is a decent score, so I like his chances of breaking out, but yeah, someone to keep an eye on rather than to draft.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. So again, the reason why you don't just have to use Dom's rankings completely, obviously also compare it to ADP and don't take a swing that you don't have to. All right, one more guy. Let's go. We were talking about Buffalo before. So your model likes Victor Olofsson a lot more than the patrons do. You've got him projected for 55-point pace, which I think would be the highest on Buffalo if Eichel's not there. Like, there's really no one there without Eichel at this point. The patrons were taking him like 168th forward in the mock drafts. You have him as the 117th forward, like a 24 goals, 55 points. So like a valuable guy, like almost 200 shots. So do you really think he can do that well on Buffalo, even if he's being? Who would be his center? I guess Middlestat and like Skinner. I don't even know what that line would be.
Yeah, that's the top line. Jeff Skinner, Casey Middlestat, Victor Olofsson. It's very bad, but someone has to score on that team, and that's the biggest reason. And I think I bumped his minutes up like way up because he's the only one of the few NHL caliber players that team has. But you do have to factor in that a lot of the reason his production has been so high is because he's played with Eichel, and now he does not. So I wouldn't risk it.
Okay.
But maybe he takes a step and starts creating for himself, and he does get to that pace, but I don't know. I'd be skeptical.
Yeah, so would I. I think he was the kind of guy before. I remember he was doing so well in his rookie season, and then as soon as he got bumped off the top power play for a little bit or down in the lineup, like he wasn't doing anything. It seemed like he really just needed to be playing with these good players who could dish it to him to have a good shot. Kind of like Line, I guess. Like you're saying, you need someone good to dish him the puck. So now I don't see someone there to do that. So I definitely would be bumping him down quite a bit.
Yeah, if I was looking at anyone on Buffalo, I would look at Middlestat or Cousins and hope or pray that they become the top line center for Buffalo and actually play that way. But that is literally just like throwing a dart, really, based on usage, more than what they've actually shown in the NHL.
Yeah, I feel bad for Dahlin. He was supposed to be like the superstar defenseman at this point, one of the best in the league, and he has no chance on this team that he's on. All right, so Don, this has been amazing. We've gone through so many players, and hopefully people have found it interesting to get your take on the behind the scenes of how this like big computer, I imagine like some big like, like mainframe computer system in your house, like cranking out all of these projections.
It is a broken laptop with like 50% of the battery life it used to have and no shift key. So it needs an upgrade.
Wow, and it still pumps out this amazing spreadsheet that so many people use. So maybe do you want to tell people how obviously they can follow all your great work, get the spreadsheet? I mean, people should know. You're Dom Lucian, but still, like, go and like promote all your awesome work.
The spreadsheet, you can find it at theathletic.com. I think it's under the betting section. I'm not sure, but if you search Dom L Fantasy on Google, it'll pop up for sure. And there's downloads for Microsoft Excel and Apple Numbers. And it's a good tool. I built it. I would recommend it.
Yeah. And also like, I don't want you to be sold short here. You also have like all this amazing other work that you do, like writing team profiles all throughout the season. You're always tweeting out all of these interesting stats and graphs. Like you're one of the top analysts, I'd say that like out there. It's really exciting to always have you on the show.
I appreciate that. It's been a wild ride. I remember the first time I came on the show, I definitely did not have the current pull I do. And I wish I got to write more about fantasy, but it just coincides at the same time with doing season previews. And those obviously don't have a fantasy slant, but it does help to like know like which players are good and which players are poised for breakout. And a lot of my thoughts are in there. And in future years, I'll definitely want to do a little more fantasy focus. But yeah, the sheet I think is a good tool. And then throughout the year, I also update a budget version of it. So every week there's a new update for projections for the rest of the season that I think should be helpful when you're scouring the waiver wire or thinking about trades.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, that's amazing. I think like another like a feature request I would have would be like all the stuff we've been talking about your talks with the beat writers to figure out who's going to be on the top power play, like what the lines are going to be. It would be cool to like see that. There's a lot of websites that people go to see the lines. We made this like game day line tweets line where I just like retweet the tweets from beat writers as they tweet out like game day lines. But yeah, obviously you've got all this information in there, but I guess you don't need it. You got the projections that, just give you the final answer that you need of when to draft these players after you've talked to all the beat writers. So anyway, thanks so much again for coming on. I know you got football going on today. I don't know how you could like pay attention to any other sport. Like hockey's clearly like the one that needs to take all your attention. Or at least that's my life. But enjoy.
Thank you, and thanks for having me again. It's always a blast.
Yeah, for sure. Have a great day.
All right,
Cool. We did it. I really
we did
appreciate it.
it.
That was a really good show.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording and save, and then figure out how to send it.
Okay, thanks. No rush. I'll not work on this until tonight. So
Okay.
okay, thanks again. I'll let you know when the show's out.
Okay. Send me. Do I have? I have probably have your email, right?
I've like messaged you those left wing lock projections before. Try like
Yeah.